As videographers, we get sold a lot of different types of lens filters. Some of those including mist filters, CPL filters, lens flare filters. But there's one filter that I feel is the most important if you're going to be shooting video, and that's the ND filter. This little guy actually lets us take advantage of our expensive lenses in very bright conditions. If you've ever shot outside on a bright sunny day with a low aperture as a videographer, you know exactly how overexposed the image can get when you don't have an ND filter. And that's where this little thing comes in handy. Without having to compromise our shutter speed, aperture, or ISO, we can simply put on an ND filter and have our image be properly exposed in bright conditions. So in this video, I want to go over exactly what an ND filter is, how to use it, and of course, when to use it. So let's get right to it. Alright, so let's start off. What is an ND filter? So ND stands for neutral density, and I'm not going to bore you with all the technical details because honestly, I don't know them myself. But all you really need to know is that an ND filter allows you to adjust the amount of light that enters your camera. Most people make this analogy that it's like sunglasses for your camera, which is pretty apt. So ND filters come in specific strengths, usually denoted by a number like 2, 4, 8, 16, etc. These numbers simply tell you how much light they reduce. So ND2 means that you're reducing the light by half, while ND8 means you're reducing it by 1/8, and so on. And ND filters can either come in one strength or in variable strengths. So you can either adjust it using a little dial, typically on the ND filter, or it'll just be a hard ND2, hard ND16, etc. So personally, I prefer using a variable ND. That's pretty much the one I have here and the one I use all the time, just because I don't like having to have a bunch of different filters at specific strengths just to have to constantly change between them depending on the lighting conditions I'm in outside. But a few things to note before you go buy a variable ND. Number one, you want to make sure that you don't get the cheapest one, because often when you adjust the dial to certain settings, it may have an X factor across your screen, and essentially that really messes with the exposure, and often it's really simple to fix. You just gotta keep adjusting the dial, but it may be annoying and can happen accidentally while you're shooting. So I highly recommend just getting a more higher quality ND filter. Number two, make sure that the ND filter you get actually fits the lens that you want to put it on. So I believe if you look on the lens, it should have like the diameter length, and in this case I think it's 42 millimeters for this lens, and so I had to buy a 42 millimeter variable ND for that lens. So just keep that in mind and make sure you don't buy the wrong thread size if that's not the size for your lens. Alright, on to how do we use the ND filter. It's really simple. There's little threads at the tip of the ND filter, and all you're going to do is take your lens and thread it on very nicely. You can put it on pretty tight, but you don't want to put it on too tight because it may become difficult to take off later. Once you have it on, turn on your camera, set all the settings to what you want it for, and you'll see that you may need to adjust the strength of the ND filter simply by sliding the ring around the lens. And that's pretty much it. That's the great thing about the variable ND. However, if you did get a single strength, or you're shooting something like, say, on a drone where typically they only have one strength ND filters, you're just going to have to keep switching between them until you get the proper exposure. I wouldn't fly the drone. I would just simply point it to the brightest part of the scene, attach the ND filter, and see if the exposure is right. And if it is, great, you can launch. And if not, just try a different strength. And then repeat this process until you have proper exposure. Now, when will we need to use the ND filter? As we previously mentioned, this is mostly useful when shooting outside, because there's going to be an abundance of light, and oftentimes it may be too bright if we have our aperture wide open. Now, this isn't normally an issue because you can really just adjust the aperture or the shutter speed, but if you do so, you're going to be compromising some secondary effects, such as losing motion blur or losing your shallow depth of field. So that's why I really love using the ND filter. With the ND filter, we can shoot in our shallow depth of field in proper motion blur, shutter speed, that is, in the lowest ISO possible, so we have the cleanest image possible, all by using an ND filter to preserve those settings. Especially when you consider that you spend all this money on expensive lenses that can open up to, say, 1.2, but you can't use it outside because the sun is too bright and it's overexposing your images. And that's why the ND filter is such a savior, because now you can actually take advantage of that 1.2 aperture outside. Now, like I said, this isn't going to be that useful indoors unless you really have extremely bright lights inside. But if you have lights inside, you usually can adjust them. So it may not be as useful, but if it is too bright indoors, this still can be used. I just haven't had that issue come up yet. Now, there are a few photography reasons to use an ND filter, but I'm not going to go over them in this video because I am focusing on video, and that's the field I'm in. But if you would like to learn more about photography uses for ND filters, please leave a comment down below and I'll be happy to do a follow-up and talk about those applications as well. So there you have it, a little mini crash course on ND filters. Although there are a lot of options for filters out there, I haven't found a use for them yet besides obviously creative looks, but I have found a necessity for ND filters. I do like shooting outdoors a lot, so I found that an ND filter was a necessity very early on in my video making career. And if I did have to choose a second filter that is somewhat necessary or more useful, I would say it's actually a CPL filter. A CPL filter simply allows us to remove a little bit of the reflections that we see in waters or windows. So you can kind of look inside of a car, or you can look what's inside of water if you're filming those things. So it's another more practical filter in my opinion, but of course, whatever style of content you're shooting, you may find that the other filters are just as useful, but I highly recommend checking out an ND and seeing if it works in your workflow. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and of course, subscribe for more filmmaking content. If you have any thoughts, leave your comments down below. I love hearing them. And if you want to learn about other filmmaking tools that you can use, check out this video I did on the 5-in-1 reflector disc that is also good for shooting outdoors. So until next time, peace.